May 30th, 1991, Garden Lodge, London. Jim Hutton woke to the sound of Freddie Mercury vomiting in the bathroom. Not unusual anymore, this had become their morning routine for months. What was unusual was what he heard after the retching stopped. Freddie was singing, softly, weakly but unmistakably singing the melody to "These Are the Days of Our Lives." Jim pushed open the bathroom door to find Freddie sitting on the floor, his back against the bathtub, his body so thin that his spine created visible ridges through his silk pajamas. Freddie looked up with eyes that were simultaneously exhausted and determined. "We're filming today," Freddie said. Not a question. A statement of fact that admitted no argument. Jim's heart sank. They'd had this conversation 3 times already this week. Each time, Jim had convinced Freddie to postpone, to wait until he was stronger, to rest just one more day. But this morning, something in Freddie's voice told Jim that waiting was over. "Fred, you can barely stand. How are you going to perform?" Freddie grabbed the towel rack and pulled himself to his feet, swaying slightly but refusing Jim's offered hand. "I'll perform the same way I've always performed, by refusing to accept that I can't." He looked at himself in the mirror, really looked, with an honesty that was more painful than any physical symptom. The man staring back was a stranger. Purple lesions dotted his face and neck, Kaposi's sarcoma, AIDS's most visible signature. His cheekbones jutted sharply beneath skin that had taken on a grayish pallor. His eyes, once bright and mischievous, were ringed with dark circles that no amount of sleep could erase. He'd lost 50 pounds. His body was eating itself from the inside. "I look like death," Freddie said quietly. "Quite literally." "Then we'll cancel," Jim replied. "No one expects everyone expects," Freddie interrupted. "They expect me to disappear, to hide, to let this disease steal everything I am before it steals my life. I won't give them that satisfaction." He turned from the mirror, his jaw set with a determination that Jim had seen before, but never quite like this. This wasn't the determination of a performer preparing for a show. This was the determination of a dying man deciding how he wanted to be remembered. "Call the studio," Freddie said. "Tell them Freddie Mercury will be there, and tell them to have the makeup artist bring everything she's got. We're going to need it." 10 a.m. Jim Beach, Queen's manager, picked up the phone on the second ring. "This is Jim. He's coming." Jim Hutton's voice was tight with worry. Freddie insists. "But Jim, you need to understand he can barely walk. He collapsed twice yesterday just trying to get to the bathroom. This could kill him." Silence on the other end. Silence on, long enough that Jim thought the line had gone dead. "If we don't film today," Jim Beach finally said, his voice heavy with a burden that managers aren't supposed to carry, "there won't be another chance. The disease is progressing too fast. This is his last opportunity to control his own narrative. To show the world Freddie Mercury, not a dying AIDS patient. He could die on that film set," Jim Hutton said bluntly. "He's dying anyway," Jim Beach replied, just as bluntly. "At least this way he dies on his own terms. As himself. As the performer he's always been." Jim Hutton hung up and went to help Freddie dress. It took 40 minutes to put on clothes that used to take 40 seconds. Every movement brought pain. Every breath was calculated. But Freddie never complained, never stopped, never showed anything except absolute focus on the task ahead. "Ready?" Jim asked when they were finally at the front door. Freddie looked back at Garden Lodge, his sanctuary, his castle, the place where he'd hidden from the world while his body betrayed him. "I'm ready to stop hiding." Limehouse Studios, East London. 9:30 a.m. Brian May stood outside the studio entrance, smoking a cigarette he didn't want, dreading the arrival he couldn't avoid. When the car pulled up and Jim helped Freddie emerge, Brian's cigarette fell from his fingers. The man walking toward him bore only the faintest resemblance to Freddie Mercury. This was a skeleton wearing Freddie's face, a ghost inhabiting Freddie's clothes, something that looked like it should be in a hospital bed, not a film studio. "Don't," Freddie said sharply, seeing the expression on Brian's face. "Don't look at me like I'm already dead. I'm still here. Still me." Brian embraced him carefully, terrified that holding too tight might break something. Freddie's body felt fragile in his arms, bird bones and sharp angles where there used to be strength and solidity. "Fred, we don't have to do this," Brian whispered. "We can tell everyone you're resting. We can." "We can film this video," Freddie cut him off, "which is what we're going to do. Now stop fussing and let me work." Inside the studio, the crew had been briefed. No staring, no gasping, no visible reactions to Freddie's appearance. Treat him like you always have. Like he's still Freddie Mercury, not a dying man. But briefings don't prepare you for reality. When Freddie walked onto the set, the collective intake of breath was audible. People who'd worked with Queen for years stood frozen, trying to reconcile their memories of the vibrant, powerful Freddie with this frail figure before them. Roger Taylor took one look and had to leave the studio. He made it outside before breaking down completely, his body shaking with sobs he couldn't control. John Deacon simply stood in the corner, silent tears streaming down his face, unable to process what he was witnessing. And Freddie Mercury, seeing all of this, squared his shoulders and announced to the room, "Right then, let's make something beautiful, shall we?" Carolyn Cowan had been Queen's makeup artist for 8 years. She'd worked on videos, tours, photo shoots. She knew Freddie's face better than her own, every angle, every feature, every tiny detail that cameras loved. But when Freddie sat in her chair that morning, she barely recognized him. The Kaposi's sarcoma lesions covered his face and neck like purple bruises. His skin had lost all color, taking on a grayish tone that makeup primers couldn't fully correct. His cheekbones were so prominent they created shadows that made him look skeletal. "Be honest," Freddie said, watching her inventory his face. "How bad is it?" Carolyn met his eyes in the mirror. "Bad enough that normal makeup won't cover it." "But I didn't bring normal makeup." She pulled out her kit-specialized concealers designed for burn victims and severe scarring, heavy foundations that could hide almost anything, color correctors that could transform purple into flesh tone. "This is going to take a while," she warned. "Then we'd better start," Freddie replied. For 45 minutes, Carolyn worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Each lesion required multiple layers: color corrector, concealer, foundation, powder. Each step had to be perfect because cameras would magnify every flaw. But this wasn't just technical work. This was transformation. With every brushstroke, Carolyn wasn't just hiding disease. She was rebuilding Freddie Mercury, giving him back the face he'd lost to AIDS, creating the illusion of health where health no longer existed. "Talk to me," Freddie said at one point. "Tell me something, anything. I need distraction." "My daughter," Carolyn said, carefully applying concealer to a particularly large lesion, "asked me who my favorite person was that I've ever worked with. I told her Freddie Mercury." "Why?" Freddie asked. "Because," Carolyn said, meeting his eyes in the mirror, "you're the only person I've ever met who treats makeup artists like artists instead of servants. You see us. You respect us. That's rare in this industry." Freddie was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're making me beautiful again. That's art of the highest order." When the makeup was finally complete, Carolyn stepped back. The transformation was remarkable. The lesions were gone. The gray pallor had been replaced with something approaching healthy color. The sunken cheeks had been contoured to look fuller. Freddie stood and looked at himself in the full-length mirror. He turned his head slowly, examining every angle, checking the illusion from every perspective. "I look like myself again," he said quietly. "Thank you for giving me that gift." But as he turned away from the mirror, Carolyn saw something flash across his face. A momentary recognition of what lay beneath the makeup. The knowledge that this was artifice, a beautiful lie covering an ugly truth. "It won't last," Freddie said, as if reading her thoughts. "The makeup, I mean. It'll fade. Smudge. Break down, just like everything else. Then we'll fix it," Carolyn said firmly. "As many times as it takes." Freddie smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes despite the exhaustion there. "You can't fix everything, darling, but you fixed this moment. That's enough." 10:30 a.m. The set was a simple black backdrop. No elaborate staging, no complex choreography, just Freddie, a camera, and a song. Director David Mallet called for quiet. The playback started, and Freddie began to sing. For 30 seconds, it was magic. His voice, that impossible four-octave instrument, filled the studio with power and emotion that made everyone forget they were watching a dying man. Then his knees buckled. Brian May, who'd been watching from beside the camera, lunged forward and caught Freddie before he hit the ground. The music stopped abruptly. "I'm fine," Freddie gasped, even though he clearly wasn't. His breathing was labored, his face pale beneath the makeup. "Just give me a moment." Jim Hutton rushed over with an oxygen tank. Freddie waved it away initially, but Jim insisted. 5 minutes with oxygen, or we're done for the day. Your choice. Freddie took the oxygen mask. For 5 minutes, the studio was silent except for the hiss of compressed air and Freddie's ragged breathing. When he removed the mask, his first words were, "Again. We're doing it again." Fred Bryan started. "Again," Freddie repeated with steel in his voice. "I didn't come here to fail." 11:15 a.m. The second attempt lasted longer. Freddie made it through half the song, his voice strong, his presence commanding. For those brief minutes, everyone could pretend that everything was fine, that this was just another video shoot, that Freddie Mercury was invincible. Then the chest pain hit. Freddie's hand flew to his chest, his face contorting with agony. The music stopped. He tried to speak but couldn't catch his breath. His lips were turning blue. "Call an ambulance!" David Mallet shouted. "No!" Freddie managed to gasp. "No hospital! Just give me!" He couldn't finish the sentence. Jim Beach was already on the phone with Dr. Gordon Atkinson, Freddie's personal physician, who arrived within 15 minutes. Dr. Atkinson's examination was brief but thorough. Rapid heartbeat, dangerously low blood pressure, oxygen saturation far below safe levels. "This needs to stop," Dr. Atkinson said firmly. "Freddie, you're risking cardiac arrest. You need to be in hospital." "No." Freddie's voice was weak but absolutely certain. "I finish this. Today. Now. Your body can't handle it," the doctor said. "Then my body will have to learn," Freddie replied, "because I'm not leaving this studio until this video is done." Dr. Atkinson looked at Jim Beach, at Brian May, at everyone hoping someone would overrule this insane decision. But everyone who knew Freddie knew the truth. When he made up his mind, forces of nature couldn't change it. 10 minutes, Dr. Atkinson said. "You get 10 minutes to rest. Then if you insist on continuing, I'll be here with everything I need to keep you alive." Those 10 minutes stretched like hours. The studio crew stood around uncomfortably, not knowing whether to stay or leave. Roger Taylor had returned, his face red and blotchy from crying. John Deacon sat in a corner, staring at nothing, and Freddie sat in his chair, eyes closed, breathing slowly and deliberately, gathering whatever reserves of strength remained in his failing body. When the 10 minutes ended, Freddie opened his eyes. "I'm ready," he said. "Let's finish this." 11:45 a.m. Something had changed in Freddie. Everyone could see it, though no one could explain it. As if he'd made some internal decision, some final bargain with fate or will or whatever force kept humans alive beyond the point when their bodies should surrender. He stood in front of the camera with a stillness that was almost supernatural. When the music began, his transformation was complete. This wasn't a sick man lip-syncing to a song. This was Freddie Mercury, the Freddie Mercury, delivering a performance that somehow contained all the power and presence he'd ever commanded, concentrated into 3 minutes and 40 seconds of pure distilled artistry. His voice on the playback was matched by his physical performance. Every subtle movement, every glance at the camera, every moment of connection with the lens, it was all perfect, as if he'd saved every ounce of energy for this exact moment. The crew stood transfixed. This was why they'd all gotten into this business, to witness moments like this, to be present when art transcended circumstance and created something that would outlive everyone in the room. As the song reached its final verse, Freddie did something no one expected. He moved closer to the camera, his face filling the frame, his eyes looking directly into the lens and through it, to everyone who would ever watch this video, and he mouthed 4 words that weren't in the song, "I still love you." When the final note faded, the studio remained silent. No one applauded, no one said cut or that's a wrap. They just stood there, processing what they'd witnessed, because everyone understood. They hadn't just filmed a music video. They'd filmed a goodbye. The makeup room. 1:30 p.m. Freddie sat alone in front of the mirror, slowly removing the carefully applied makeup. With each swipe of the makeup remover, the illusion dissolved. The lesions reappeared. The gray pallor returned. The ghost beneath the artist revealed itself once more. Carolyn entered quietly. "I can help with that." "No," Freddie said gently. "I need to do this myself. I need to see what's really there." He continued removing the makeup until his face was completely bare. Then he stared at his reflection for a long time, longer than was comfortable for Carolyn to witness. "Do you know what I see?" Freddie finally said. Carolyn waited. "I see someone who lasted longer than they said I would. Someone who created more than they said I could. Someone who loved harder than they said I should." He turned to face her. "Thank you for giving me one more day of being Freddie Mercury instead of just Farrokh Bulsara dying of AIDS." "You're always Freddie Mercury," Carolyn said, tears streaming down her face. "The makeup didn't make you him. You made the makeup into art." Freddie smiled, sad, exhausted, but genuine. "Then I'm glad my last performance was for you and everyone here today. You deserve to see me at my best one final time." November 24th, 1991. Garden Lodge. Freddie Mercury died at 7 p.m., surrounded by the people who loved him most. The world mourned. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. And that video, filmed on May 30th, shot in 3 agonizing takes, created through sheer force of will, when will was all that remained, became his final message to the world. When it aired, no one except those present at the filming knew what it had cost him. No one understood that every second represented a triumph over a body that was shutting down. No one realized that the makeup hiding his face was also hiding his goodbye. It wasn't until 2005, when Carolyn Cowan finally told the story in a documentary, that the truth emerged. The 45 minutes of makeup, the 3 collapsed takes, the doctor on standby, the absolute determination to be seen as Freddie Mercury one last time. "People ask me why we did such heavy makeup that day," Carolyn said during the interview, 14 years after Freddie's death. "The answer is simple. We were hiding the disease. We were preserving the image. We were giving Freddie the gift of being remembered as he wanted to be remembered, as an artist, not a victim." She paused, composing herself. That makeup wasn't just about covering lesions. It was about dignity, about agency, about a dying man's right to control his own narrative until the very end. When Freddie looked in the mirror that day and said, "I look like a ghost," he was right. But what we created together, that wasn't a ghost. That was Freddie Mercury, alive and vital and giving everything he had left for one final performance. And those 4 words, "I still love you," weren't in the script. They weren't planned. They were Freddie's spontaneous message to everyone who ever cared about his music. That's what makes them so powerful. That's why people still cry when they watch that video. Because in that moment, we weren't watching a performer. We were watching a human being saying goodbye with grace and love, despite unimaginable suffering. Today, These Are the Days of Our Lives stands as one of the most poignant music videos ever created. Not because of elaborate production or innovative cinematography, but because of what it represents. A final act of defiance against death itself. Freddie Mercury could have disappeared. Could have hidden away in Garden Lodge until the end came. Could have let the world remember him as he was in his prime, young, healthy, invincible. Instead, he chose to be seen, to show up, to perform one final time, knowing it would be his last, knowing the cost, choosing to pay it anyway. The 45 minutes of makeup weren't about vanity. They were about autonomy, about refusing to let disease define how you're remembered, about taking control of your own story until you no longer have the strength to hold the pen. And when Freddie mouthed those 4 words, "I still love you," he wasn't just addressing his fans. He was addressing life itself, acknowledging that despite everything it had taken from him, despite the pain and the loss and the dying, he still chose love, still chose connection, still chose to give rather than retreat into bitterness. That's the real legacy of that video. Not the makeup or the production or even the song itself, but the message that echoes through every frame, even at the end, especially at the end, love matters most. May 30th, 1991. 3 takes, 45 minutes of makeup, 1 perfect performance, 1 eternal goodbye. Freddie Mercury didn't just film a music video that day. He taught the world how to die with grace, dignity, and love. And 33 years later, that lesson still matters.